موجود كلنا اقرا بس بدون اسمع
Okay, salam alaikum. So, I guess you went through the introductory lecture to Sulaiman, and this lecture will be speaking roughly about the gross morphology of the brain. Because of time matter, I will be speaking about the forebrain part only. The remaining parts, we will speak about it in more details in upcoming lectures. So, when we speak about the brain, here's what is the definition of the brain. The brain is the part of the central nervous system that lies within the skull. This is for the location, okay? And continues with the spinal cord through the foramen magnum, okay? So it's part of the central nervous system. Here, we have to speak about the divisions of the nervous system. Nervous system, to avoid any confusion, is divided physiologically based on function and structurally based on anatomy, okay? Anatomically, the nervous system divides based on its location. So we have the central nervous system, which is made of brain and spinal cord, and it is covered or protected by bony structures, mainly the cranium or the skull and the vertebral column, okay? This is the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system now is the nerves, okay, that distributed outside, okay, in your body. Those are mainly 31 spinal nerves and 12 cranial nerves, okay? So we have nerves that arise directly from the brain, okay? Generally, we call them cranial nerves. We will speak in more details about their definition because one of them is not actually from the brain. So we have cranial nerves, 12 ones, and we have 31 nerves going out from the spinal cord. We call them spinal nerves. Okay? So those spinal 31 and the cranial 12 are the peripheral nervous system. To avoid confusion again, you have to remember that these spinal nerves, once they leave the spinal cord, they will start joining each other in a network structure. Okay? We call it plexuses. Okay? So we have joining between the nerves in the cervical region. We call it cervical plexus. Okay? Where the nerves mix together. We have spinal nerves joined also between cervical and thoracic region. We call it brachial plexus because this plexus will give the other nerves to the upper limb. Okay? So we have the spinal nerves short distance. Once they leave, they will form plexuses. Cervical, brachial, lumbosacral, and sacral plexuses. From these plexuses now, you will have which we call it the peripheral nerves in your body. The peripheral nerves now are actually what? Groups of some axons from the spinal nerves, different ones. Okay? So for example, peripheral nerves are, if you study the upper limb, you know there's radial nerve, you heard about it, medial nerve, you hear about the sacral nerve, the longest nerve in your body. All these are peripheral nerves. They come from the plexuses. Okay? These plexuses formed by the spinal nerves. Okay? So for example, when they say the sciatic nerve, you say its segments are L4, L5, S1, S2, S3. What does this mean? The nerve, as you know, is a group of what? Of axons. Okay? Millions of axons from millions of nerve cells join together to form a nerve. And these axons, which are elongated processes, can reach more than 1 meter in length, like the case in the sciatic nerve. Okay? So millions of axons join together. A bundle of axons come from the spinal nerve L4. Okay? Another bundle comes from spinal nerve L5. Another bundle from S1. Okay? So group of axons from L4, L5, S1, S2, S3, spinal nerves join together. Once these axons join together in one connective tissue, epithelium, they will become which we call it sciatic nerve. Clear now? So the spinal nerve usually give bundle, for example, let's say C2 for example, the cervical spinal nerve number 2, can give some bundles to a nerve, okay, that goes to the posterior of the skull. Another group of it will go to the anterior aspect of the skull. So the bundles divide from the spinal nerves within the plexuses to form later on the peripheral nerves. Okay? So now you have to distinguish the terminology of the cranial nerves. Those are coming directly or passing directly through the foramina and the skull. Okay? Nerves. The others are the spinal nerves. Spinal nerves form plexuses, networks. From these plexuses, there will be what? Peripheral nerves, which are, you study their names, radial nerve, sciatic nerve, medial nerve, whatever nerve. Okay? Clear? This is for the peripheral nervous system. For the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. So this is related to anatomy. Central, peripheral. The other classification of nervous system based on function, as you know, you have the somatic nervous system, okay, and the autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system subdivided into two types: sensory and motor. Motor to where? The skeletal muscle. So you sense, you move. Very good. This is the sensation. You move your hand voluntarily by the movement, by the contraction of skeletal muscle. The other one is the autonomic. Autonomic nervous system, which is involuntary, is also two parts. Sympathetic, which sympathizes with you at dangerous situations or in dangerous situations, and parasympathetic, which means doesn't like you in dangerous situations. So it's active during relaxation. Okay? Sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay? And it controls the involuntary structures. Like what? The cardiac muscle, the heart, the smooth muscle within the tubes in your body. Wherever you have a tube, artery, vein, intestine, you will have smooth muscle there. Controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Also, it controls what? Glands. The glands. Okay? Like sweat glands, sebaceous glands, whatever glands there. It's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So this is physiologically. Autonomic and somatic. Now, in a peripheral nerve, go back anatomically speaking. Okay? In a peripheral nerve coming from a certain plexus from the spinal nerves, okay, you can find some somatic fibers, you can find some autonomic fibers. Okay? For example, I'm not going to go in more details, but just this is because it's just introduction for it. You will study it in the next course, neuroscience 2. So, now, when we speak here in anatomy, we speak that we have central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. In physiology, you will be learned about autonomic and somatic. Okay, what about the brain now? Since we know that the brain is part of the central nervous system within the skull, okay, protected by the skull. The brain itself, at dimag, okay, is divided actually into three parts. The largest part is here, which forms 80% of the brain. This part, we call it the forebrain, the highest part. Okay? There is a small part here, we call it the midbrain, okay, in the middle. This is it only. Then we have all of this behind the brain. Hind means the tail, the lowest part. Okay? The brain, once it's formed, if you remember this, because I want to speak about the parts of the brain now. Do you remember this during the digestive system when we spoke about the embryology? We said that during the third week we have three different layers in the embryo. We have the yellow one, which is ectoderm, the red one here, the mesoderm, and this one, endoderm, which will become later on the primordial gut. Yes? I told you at that time, these columnar cells, the ectoderm, will start to proliferate and increase in number, forming a groove. This is called the neural groove. Okay? With more proliferation and more increase in number of cells, this groove will go down and separate from the layer of ectoderm by itself. Now it's called the neural tube. This is the neural tube where the cells here, the ectodermal cells now from within this tube will form the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. Now if you look in a longitudinal section here, you see this yellow one is the ectoderm, this here is the primordial gut from endoderm, this here is the neural tube. Can you see it? Now the neural tube, the cells in the cranial part or in the topmost part of the tube will start to increase more, form three bulgings or dilatations. You see them? This is one, this is two, this is three. From these three dilatations or bulgings, because of increased number of cells, there will become the brain. The remaining part of the tube here will become what? The spinal cord. These three bulgings, they call them because of their relocation. The highest one is called the prosencephalon, okay, the most prominent one, okay. Then one in the middle, we call it mesencephalon, okay? And the last one here in the tail, the rhombencephalon. Rhomben means the tail, okay? So three bulgings, prosencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon. Those three parts will form later on what? The brain. The prosencephalon later on will become, which we call it the forebrain. All this part from the prosencephalon, the forebrain now it's called, okay? Forebrain is actually two structures. The largest part of them is the cerebrum, al-mukh, okay? The cerebrum. So all of this you see here is the cerebrum, and this here small structure area here. This is, we call it the diencephalon. Di means two structures. Encephalon inside, covered within the cephalon, within the cerebrum. So if you look, you cannot see it because it's completely covered by the cerebrum, okay, of the forebrain. So prosencephalon will become forebrain. Forebrain is made of two structures, the cerebrum itself and the diencephalon. Diencephalon is composed of two parts, thalamus and hypothalamus. Okay? Thalamus is a Latin word that means the chamber, al-ghurfa, or more precisely, it means the bedroom. Because the bedroom is always within the house, is covered. Okay? You cannot see it. So here, this is a room that's covered by the cerebrum. That's why they call it thalamus. Okay? It's a bedroom or it's a chamber that's covered by the cerebrum. They call it thalamus, and the other structure below it here, this one, they call it hypothalamus, the area below the thalamus. Okay? So now we have prosencephalon. From it, there will become the cerebrum and the diencephalon, thalamus and hypothalamus. Down below, in the middle, bulging, the mesencephalon now will develop, but not as much as this here, bulging in the middle, the mesencephalon will not develop as much as the prosencephalon. It will form a very small area here. You see it? This area only. We call it now the midbrain. Midbrain is the same as mesencephalon. Okay? So from mesencephalon, bulging, you will have the midbrain. The rhombencephalon now, which is the lowest part in the tail, will become, which we call it the hindbrain. Hindbrain is made of three structures. This prominent large area, okay, you see it? We call it the bones. Bones means the bridge, al-jism, because it's bridging the two cerebellar hemispheres, okay, together. It connects the two cerebellar hemispheres, al-mukhayl, okay? So you will have the bones, the bridge. Down to the bones, you will have an elongated core of the central nervous system. نسميه النخاع المستطيل. medulla and nukhاع oblongata, elongated. The elongated medulla, okay? Medulla oblongata or النخاع المستطيل. Medulla oblongata terminates at the level of foramen magnum. Okay? At the lower level of foramen magnum, medulla oblongata will become continuous with what?
Spinal cord.
With the spinal cord. And behind those two structures, behind the bones and medulla oblongata, you will have the cerebellum. Okay? Al-mukhayl. The cerebellum. So cerebellum is part of what? Of the hindbrain. Okay? Or rhombencephalon. So three structures in the hindbrain. Bones, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata. Okay? The cerebellum is made up of two hemispheres. Those two hemispheres are joined together by what? By axons or nerve fibers. Those nerve fibers, they pass from one hemisphere to other, okay, like this. As they pass, they will go anteriorly, form a bulging. This bulging is thus. Okay? That's why they call it a bridge, because the nerve fibers from one cerebellar hemisphere will go to another one, to the other one, okay? By this. So they will pass forming an bulge, okay, or an overhang area. We call it the bones. That's why it's bones, because it's bridging the two cerebellar hemispheres. Cerebellum is 1/10, the brain mass. Okay, yet contains half number of nerve cells in the brain. So in the brain, usually you have 100 billion nerve cells, 100 billion neurons. 40 to 50 billion are located here in this structure, in the cerebellum, which indicates how much complicated the function that are carried out by the cerebellum, okay, compared to other structures. So this is in general the structure of the brain. This is to show you the diagram of the neural tube. The most cranial part is the prosencephalon, where you will have cerebrum and diencephalon. The middle part, mesencephalon, will become what? Midbrain. The lowest part, rhombencephalon, will become three structures: bones, medulla oblongata, and cerebellum. Another term now, it's a descriptive term. You will hear it a lot. It's called the brain stem, the stem of the brain. Now, some scientists imagine that the brain looks like a tree, and the cerebrum or the forebrain alone forms what? The main part of this tree. Okay? And this part here is the trunk of the tree, the jither, the stem of the tree. Okay? That's why they call this part the jither or the brain stem. So the brain stem is composed mainly of the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Okay? Those three structures: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, forming the brain stem. Cerebellum is not part of the brain stem. It's part of what? The three leaves. Okay? For example, descriptive. Okay? So when we speak, what are the components of hindbrain? Hindbrain components are pons, medulla oblongata, and cerebellum. What are the components of the brain stem?
bones,
Midbrain, pons,
bones
and
medulla oblongata.
Is this clear? Speaking about the largest part of the brain, as I told you, 80% of the brain, 80% من الدماغ هو المخ. Okay? The cerebrum. Okay? So 80% is the cerebrum. It's the largest part of the brain. It's made up of two hemispheres, of course, right and left. Those two hemispheres are separated by a very deep fissure. Fissure عميق جدا. This deep fissure longitudinally running, we call it the longitudinal fissure because it runs from front to the back. Okay? And within this fissure, you will find usually a very tough area of meninges in السحايا. We call it fox cerebri. Okay? Separating between the two cerebral hemispheres. Now the cerebrum itself is, as you look to it, it's folded. It's not flat surface. It's folded into elevations and depressions. An elevation will be called a gyrus, okay, or gyri, and the depressions will be called sulcus, or the plural is sulci. Okay? So why this folding happened? Again, if you remember the lingual vertebrae of the tongue, they are to increase surface area. Why we need to increase the surface area of the brain here?
Increase the amount of gray matter.
By increasing the surface area here, the cerebral cortex, instead of having only 4 billion neurons, it will be having 10 billion. The cerebral cortex itself, not the whole brain. Okay, I'm speaking. So by this, in the cerebrum, okay, in the outer part of the cerebrum, you will increase the number of nerve cells. Is this good or bad? Well, there is a debate that if you have a more elevations, so means more nerve cells, that will indicate a higher level of species. Other scientists debate that, say it has not, because it depends on the number of how many functional neurons are there in the cerebrum. However, an interesting thing about this issue, the foldings in the brain and their relation to the increase in number of nerve cells. In 2012, there was a paper published describing the brain of Albert Einstein. Okay? Once Albert Einstein died in 1955, they took out his brain, fixed it, and take photographs for it. Okay? In 2012, they discovered that around 14 photographs for Albert Einstein's brain. Okay? 14 photographs. The scientists studied these photographs, and one of the interesting discoveries there in his photographs, they discovered that there is an additional gyrus in Albert Einstein's brain, in the frontal area. Okay? So if you look, usually in a human, I will speak about this in more detail, about the descriptive tomography. But in a human, you will have only 3 elevations in the frontal area. You will have 1, 2, 3. In Einstein's brain, they discovered that he has 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? He has 4 gyri, okay, in the frontal lobe. So he has a superior, a middle, an inferior middle, and inferior frontal gyrus. Instead of having just superior, middle, and inferior. So this is for the fold. It's the public. This article is available for you. Anyone who's interested, he can go and read. Just like Einstein's brain, the journal name is Brain. Okay, it's a very famous journal. Journal of the Brain. Now when we speak about the cerebrum inside, about the internal structure, so from outside we know that cerebrum is folded, gyri and sulci to increase the surface area. What about inside? If you took this horizontal section of the brain, this is the cerebrum. You will see that the outer layer of the cerebrum, which we call it cerebral cortex, and the inner layer, the deepest part here, we call it the core, cerebral core. Okay? In the cortex, the القشرة الخارجية, in the outer part of the cerebrum, then you see that you have something more brownish to gray in color material. Okay? This is which we call it the gray matter. Okay? While deep in the core, you will find what? More white, dry staining appearance. We call it the white matter. What's the difference between gray matter and white matter? So, if you took a normal nerve cell from what you studied in histology, the nerve cell is made up of dendrites, yes? Nerve cell body and the axon. Those ones which I told you, millions of these axons together will form a nerve in the peripheral nervous system, not in the CNS, of course. Okay? These axons of the nerve cells usually become myelinated or covered with a material, white dry staining material, مادة شفافة لامعة, okay? White in color, مش شفافة, بيضاء لماعة. Okay? This material is called, it's connective tissue material. It's called myelin sheath. Okay? This myelin sheath, when it's covered the axons, it will give the white color appearance. Okay? This one. So what is white matter? White matter is actually nothing more than the myelinated axons of the nerve cells. Okay? So what is the gray matter then? The gray matter, the cortex here, is representing actually the dendrites and the nerve cell bodies. There. Okay? So in the cortex of the cerebrum, القشرة الخارجية, the gray matter, you will find actually the nerve cell body and the dendrites. Okay. While in the white matter here, you will find what? The myelinated axons. However, in the cerebrum, in some areas within the white matter, you will see an isolated region of gray matter. شايفينها؟ جزر لحالها, islands, مفصولة, محاطة كاملا بالوايت matter. Okay? These islands of the gray matter in the cerebrum or in the central nervous system, let's speak specifically, we call it nuclei. So nucleus in neuroanatomy is an area of gray matter totally surrounded by white matter. Okay? This is the nucleus. Nucleus in biology is what? It's the area of genetic material, DNA, period, okay? Of the cell, within the cell, of course. Okay? So it's totally different terms. Distinguish them. In biology, nucleus, DNA, okay, within the cell. In neuroanatomy, nucleus is an area of gray matter within white matter. In the peripheral nervous system now, these areas of the gray matter will be called ganglia. Okay, or ganglion. Okay, so the ganglion is in the peripheral nervous system. In the central nervous system, we don't call them ganglia, we call them nuclei. Okay, and we will speak about them. There is a specific lecture about it. One of the nuclei, for example, is the thalamus here. You see this structure here? This is which I told you about the thalamus. Okay, within the diencephalon. So the diencephalon itself is a nucleus within the cerebrum. So we have cerebral cortex, gray matter, nerve cell body and dendrites. Cerebral core, white matter, myelinated axons. Okay? Within this white matter, you will find some gray matter areas. We call them nuclei. Now, what about the topography of brain? Scientists decide to make it easier to study the brain, to divide the brain into different parts or lobes. Okay? This division based on the underlying bone, which they located. Okay? So if the part of the brain located under the frontal bone, we will call it frontal part or frontal lobe. Okay? Under the parietal, we will call it parietal lobe. Occipital, and here will be the temporal lobe. So we have 4 lobes for each cerebral hemisphere. Okay? We have frontal lobe under the frontal bone, parietal lobe under the parietal bone, occipital one, and temporal one. What is the border between them? You need to distinguish a border. So they decide that the border should be a depression, not an elevation. It should be a sulcus. Okay? A depression, not elevation. So because of this, we have to know the main cerebral sulci that separates between these lobes. Okay? So to study these main sulci separating the lobes, The first one of them, we refer to it as the central sulcus. This is it. In the middle, you will see a vertical sulcus going in a different direction. Most of the sulci in the brain, if you look, will go more or less in a horizontal way. But there is a specific one that goes vertically from up to down in the center. This is called the central sulcus. Okay? Central sulcus of the brain. Central sulcus, it separates what? The frontal lobe of the brain from parietal lobe. Okay? And it's actually located in a very important region. Because anterior to the central sulcus here, we will have an elevation, gyrus. We will call it anterior, before the pre-central gyrus. Okay? Because it's before the central sulcus. And the gyrus behind the central sulcus, post-central gyrus. So the central sulcus separates frontal lobe from parietal lobe. Anterior to it, you will have the pre-central gyrus. Behind it, you will have post-central gyrus. Why those two gyri are important? Yes, the function. The pre-central gyrus is the primary motor area in your brain. The primary motor area, which is the area that controls the contraction of your skeletal muscles. In other words, controlling your movement. Okay? So that's why it's very important. The pre-central gyrus is the motor area, while the post-central gyrus is the primary sensory area in your brain. Okay? Which controls the somatic sensations. Okay? So that's why they are important. The pre-central gyrus is located where? In the frontal lobe. Yes? Because the border is central sulcus. The post-central gyrus in the parietal lobe. Now to distinguish between them, post contains the letter S. So it starts with sensory. So the post-central gyrus is the sensory area. The pre contains what? R in it. So it's the motor area. Okay? And those two main gyri controlling mainly or roughly your somatic nervous system. حكيت لكم عنه sensation وإيش وmotor. So what's happening there? Once you touch a cup of coffee, very hot. Okay? So the signals will go through the nerves, okay, the peripheral nerves, comes to the CNS, all the way up to the neurons in the post-central gyrus. Here you will interpret that there is a feeling of what? Of burning pain because of hotness. Okay? Now, interconnecting neurons between the post and the pre-central gyrus here, inter means between, connecting the two areas, the post-central gyrus and pre-central gyrus, will take this interpretation of sensation into the pre-central gyrus. The pre-central gyrus will send signals through descending neurons to the skeletal muscles. Okay? It will go to the extensors and say what? Contract. So you will move your hand, okay, away. Then it will ask the biceps to contract, so you will move your hands. Okay? You do extension and deflection, for example. Okay? Clear? So that's what's happening. Sensation goes to the post-central gyrus, from post-central interconnecting neurons to the brain, from the brain down to the skeletal muscles. Okay? So that's why they are very important areas. The central sulcus and pre and post-central gyri. The primary motor area, as you see here, the pre-central gyrus is the primary motor area in your brain, okay, which contains large motor neurons. It controls what? The voluntary skeletal muscle. Of what? Of the opposite side. So pre-central gyrus to the right, controlling the contraction of the left, and the pre-central gyrus in the left, controlling the contraction of muscles in the right side. Because the descending axons of nerve cells in the pre-central gyrus, descending axons will cross over to the opposite side of the body in the medulla oblongata, at the level of medulla oblongata, at the lowest part of the brain. Before they go to the spinal cord, they will cross over to the opposite side. Okay? By this, you will be controlling the opposite side of your body. فيدكم من الشعر not just to the opposite side, even the neurons here that controlling the movements of your body are located in an inverted position. So in the highest point of the pre-central and post-central gyri, there will be control for your foot, sensation and movements of your foot. Okay? And you go down, then you will have the leg, the thigh, the trunk, up to where? To the face and head, at the lowest part. Okay? So the neurons in the lowest part of the post-central gyrus here will take sensations from head and neck. And the neurons in the pre-central gyrus will get signals, motor signals to the muscles in the head and neck. Okay? While the neurons here will take sensation from where? From the foot. And will give movement to the muscles that move in the foot. Okay? So, the right side يتحكم بالليفت in an inverted way again. والليفت بالرايت in an inverted way. Okay? Wallahi, it's still under research. Why? Nobody still knows yet. The same as I told you in the post-central gyrus, there will be a crossover opposite sides in the medulla oblongata and spinal. Other sulci there that separate. Okay, the central sulcus, we said that central sulcus separates the frontal and parietal. The other one which goes here, very prominent sulcus and deep one, which we call it the lateral sulcus or fissure of Sylvian, okay, or Sylvian fissure. Okay? اكتشفها اسمه فرانسيسكاس سيلفيوس, a Deutsch scientist. He was the first to describe it. في القرن ال 17 طبعا. So it's called the Sylvian fissure or the lateral sulcus. It's very important because it separates the temporal lobe from frontal and parietal. واحدة من السنترال sulcus بتنزل لنصها عادة. Okay? So it separates the temporal lobe away from the frontal and parietal sulcus. Okay, from the other side. This is called the lateral sulcus or Sylvian fissure. The other sulcus is called parieto-occipital, not that very prominent from the lateral side. If you go to the medial side, you can find it. Very prominent sulcus here. This is the parieto-occipital. From its name, it separates the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. Okay? From the occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is mainly, nerve cells in the occipital lobe is mainly concerned with interpretation of vision. The function of vision. Okay? So once you have this sulcus here, there is a prominent sulcus here. You see it? This is functionally important. The calcarine sulcus. Okay? Calcarine sulcus, from its name, calcarine, which means here, spare, mihmaz, the spare. In the Wild West, okay, in ancient or in old times, they used this structure to put it in their boots once they ride on horses, to hit the horse so that it can run. احنا بنسميه المهماز. Okay, المهماز or the spear. They call it the spear or calcarine sulcus because if you look to it, it looks like then it bifurcates here, as you see. Okay, so look more or less like a spear. Okay, they call it the calcarine sulcus. This calcarine sulcus is important because its function. The center or the most concentrated area of vision interpretation. Okay? So it's related to the function of what? Of vision interpretation. The calcarine sulcus located on the medial surface of the occipital lobe, as you see here. Okay? Medially, not laterally. Okay? It communicates with what? Which sulcus is this?
Right
Occipital sulcus. Okay? And it's the region of what? Visual interpretation. This is for the main sulci. The other sulci, just to let you know now, the other description is easy. When you look to any lobe, you will see that you have mainly 3 gyri. So we call them based on their location. The most superior one here, I will call it the superior of which lobe? Temporal. This would be the superior temporal gyrus. The one in the middle will be middle temporal, distinguish it, gyrus. Okay, the lowest one, inferior temporal gyrus. 3 gyri, how many sulci there? 2. 2, separated them. Superior temporal sulcus, inferior temporal sulcus. Okay, the same for the frontals. You have a superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, and inferior frontal gyrus. And 2 sulci, superior and inferior frontal sulci. Okay, except in Einstein's brain. Now, main functional regions, I think you will study this in more details, but I just want to emphasize on certain points. They describe that in the cerebral cortex, the nerve cells in certain region, each a group of nerve cells in a specific region of the cortex or in the cerebrum are concerned with a specific function. This is what they call it functional localization of the brain. Okay? So each local area has its certain or specific function. Okay? This is what we mean by functional localization of the brain. The main important functions you need to know, the motor area, where is it? In the pre-central gyrus. Motor R with R, pre-central gyrus. Okay? Opposite what? Yes. The post is the sensory area. طبعا تذكروا inverted opposite side. Okay. Now you have the auditory area. What does audio mean? Hearing. The hearing area is usually here. This is the auditory area. In the middle, this is very important. In the middle of the superior temporal gyrus. This is auditory, hearing. It distinguishes sounds, not language. This is important. So once you hear a sound of a car, you can distinguish it from a sound of a bird. Okay? From a sound of a human. Okay? So it's the area of sound interpretation, the hearing. Okay? In the middle of the superior temporal gyrus. The interpretation of language is just close to it, because once you hear this sound, it's the sound of the professor speaking. This interpretation, which I am talking now, you hear it in the middle of the superior temporal gyrus. The neurons from here will distinguish that this is a sound of a human. What does he say? You need to interpret the language now. So the neurons will send signals to the neurons behind here, in the posterior of the superior temporal gyrus. This is the language interpretation area, posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus, which we call it Wernicke's area, referring to Karl Wernicke, a German scientist who described it for the first time. So they call it Wernicke's area, in the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus. And of course, as more language you learn, English, then French, then Norwegian, so the number of neurons specialized in this area will increase. So this area will expand, not just behind in the posterior superior temporal gyrus. It sometimes can go all the way to here, into the parietal lobe, behind the lateral substance. It depends of how many languages you know and how many functional neurons related to the interpretation of language. Okay? So it's not rigid. It's a dynamic. It can expand. Okay? In people who have more knowledge of languages. Okay? This is called Wernicke's area. We call it language interpretation area. And distinguish it, please, from the sound or auditory area. So this is Wernicke's language area. It interprets the meaning of speech by recognizing the spoken words, what I am talking about. Okay? It's located where? Posterior to the superior temporal gyrus, close to the middle. Now, I ask you, for example, what's your name? So the sound go to the middle of the superior temporal gyrus. منه Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area فسر إنه what's your name? فهم المعنى. Now he needs to respond. So the signals will go to another area in the cortex. They will move into the inferior frontal gyrus. Back again, here. You see? This area, which we call it the Broca's area, referring to Paul Broca, a French scientist, will describe it. The Broca's area, now the nerves here will start producing a signal. This signal will go with what? With the nerves that will move the muscles of speech, okay, to produce speech in a proper way. So he will say what? Just that? Okay. So he will say, my name is Joseph, in an ordered, comprehensive way. He will build a sentence that easily understood. Okay? So the area that produces speech in an ordered way. Okay? So in planning, then the production of speech in a comprehensive way. My name is, name my Joseph is, it's to build the words in an ordered way. It's called Broca's area, okay, or motor speech area. اللي هي موجودة
inferior frontal
the inferior frontal gyrus. So you have auditory, Wernicke's, and motor speech area. Now they discovered that damage to this region, damage to Broca's area, بسبب المرض بنسميه ايش؟ Broca's aphasia or influent aphasia, where the patient will start to speak words in any ordered way. طريقة غير مفهومة. Okay? So this is Broca's aphasia. Another aphasia damage to Wernicke's area بسبب ايش؟ Wernicke's aphasia. البيشنت ببطل يفهم شو بتحكي معه. He can't speak normally, but he doesn't understand. فانت لما تقول له شو اسمك؟ بحكي لك شتت امبارح. Yeah. He doesn't know what you are talking. He cannot interpret what you're speaking about. So Bruch's aphasia, as you see, damage to where? To the inferior frontal gyrus. Okay? In this case, there will be difficulty in speech due to damage to the neurons there. So the person in Bruch's aphasia, verticus شغال. So he knows what he wants to say. بيفهم عليه what's your name, معارف. But the problem is that he cannot speak it in an orderly way. Okay? And you have to distinguish always aphasia from dysarthria, the difficulty of speech, okay, or articulation. And from stuttering, the التأتأة. ما لها علاقة لا بالتأتأة ولا بالإيش بالdysarthria. So for all of this, I brought you these videos just to distinguish between them. For example, this is a typical case of Bruch's aphasia.
بس شوف جديد.
So the patient here went home, took his dinner, then he felt a pain in his joints, lower limb joints, knees and ankles. Okay? But once the doctor asked him, he couldn't answer what's happening. You will see that.
Eight.
He took dinner.
And
Cannot speak, see? Because there is no nerve cells to produce signals of speech there.
knees and ankles. What'd you do with it? Home. Doctor.
So I want to say, we call it the home.
Legs.
So you see, he knows what he wants to speak, but he cannot say that. Just a minute. So another case, this is more recent case. This is a case of a stroke in the area of the Bruch's. So she doesn't to speak her name. She doesn't know what to say.
That's fine. And
How old are you? She cannot say. So you see that the nerve signals there in Bruch's area there is no nerve signal because of damage. So there is no neuron. So there is no signal to produce the word 19. Okay? This has to be distinguished from dysarthria. Now in dysarthria, as you see in this case, so in dysarthria,
in that picture, and slide. Okay, can you make up a story about it? And
difficulty in articulation or in speech. Problem here is in neuromuscular disorder, where it's not damage to Bruch's area, but rather than a damage somewhere in the nerves, axons, basing, or in the muscles themselves that produce speech. Like, for example, damage in hypoglossal nerve, which move the muscles of the tongue, or damage in the muscles of the tongue itself, themselves, like genioglossus, hypoglossal. So the damage is in neuromuscular, but after Bruch's area, not Bruch's area. So the nerves there, they produce the signal, but somehow the nerve signal does not reach, okay? Or there is damage in the neurons itself or in the muscles, okay? We said it's a neuromuscular disorder, okay? The last thing, just to distinguish them, stuttering.
نفسية.
Jim Burgess. Is that it? Yes.
So that's a prolongation and continuation of radiation. Okay? In this case, it's more psychological or because of some problem in the projection of signals, nerve signals. There's a continuation of projection of nerve signals. So those all are different parts. This deviation a little bit, I will just finish, but I need to speak a little bit about the diencephalon, guys, because this is very important. When we speak about diencephalon, the last thing in the whole brain, I told you, it's made up of thalamus, this area, and hypothalamus. It's very important to know a little bit about the thalamus. The thalamus itself, if you look to it here, you see, this is one thalamus on the side, this is the other one. So it's oval-shaped gray matter area, okay? So it's a nucleus. It contains nerve cell bodies, okay? Where there is synapse there, you see, okay? Between axons. This thalamus is oval or egg-shaped mass of a gray matter, okay? And its main function, you have to know that it's covered by the cerebrum. It's the major relay station for sensory pathways. This is the station which distribute the sensory pathways that coming up, okay? So, if you feel a hot, okay, sensation or a pain sensation from your hand, this will pass into the thalamus phase. Within the thalamus, the nerve cells will decide now that this area in the right side has to go to the left post central gyrus, okay, where almost in the middle. A sensation from your foot, from your left foot, will go to the thalamus. The thalamus nerve cells will decide it has to go where? To the right, post central gyrus, where? Up in the post central gyrus, okay? The vision, when their vision signals go to the thalamus, nerve cells in the thalamus, they will send these signals where? To the occipital lobe, the thalamus. So it's the area that distributes the sensory pathways to cerebral cortex, okay, in your brain. So it's very important to know this. This is the thalamus. Oval mass of a gray matter that contains many nuclei. So it's many nuclei. Each area concerned with a special sensory region, okay? And the nerve cells there will send the sensation to the local location. There is something called interthalamic connection, if you see it. Not always this one here, which connects the two thalami together to each side, okay? It's usually in 70, that joins to the mind, it's always in 70% of human brain. Not always, not in everybody, okay? In some humans. And the last thing, hypothalamus, if you remember in the endocrine lecture, okay, we said that hypothalamus is an area which controls the endocrine system. حكيت لكم في رأس الدولة، بعدين في ايش؟ الحكومة، رئيس الوزراء، بعدين في other parts، اوكي؟ ففي عندكم الهايبوثالاموس هي رأس الدولة في الاندوكراين سيستم which controls the pituitary gland. نقول انه هي رئيس الوزراء. The pituitary gland controlling what other endocrine glands in your body. So hypothalamus is connecting nervous system, our nervous system controlling over endocrine system, okay, in your body. Hypothalamus. By secreting hypothalamus releasing hormone, it secretes vasopressin or antidiuretic, which is valid. Oxytocin. Yes. Contraction of smooth muscles in the uterus and the production of what? Of milk in the mammary gland.
Release of milk.
Milk, yeah.